Am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
guys, before that, I just want to make sure does everyone also consent for the video to be published later? OG consents
Oh,
OOCG.
consent.
Okay, CGCO. CG consent CO, only waiting for CO. Right, perfect. Happy watching for the people later. Right? You can continue PM. Thank you everyone.
Um, Gender pronoun she, her. You can state your POI to raise hand or unmute yourself because I won't look at the chat box yet. I hope you can give me at least one POI. I'll take it from C. I'll prioritize from CO. Okay, firstly on setup, because this is this household motion, I'm going to stay. We'll be doing this frameworks and enforcing this fee for the origin country to get those compensations, right? There's three mechanizations that needs to, yeah, that I will put into this debate, right? A, the one that will be enforcing this, firstly, is from the international federation, right? They will be the one that impose this framework in itself, the rule, etc. Since they are the one that have authority and there's that they also govern all the federations across all countries as well. This is just to ensure this is followed and enforced by every single part of the country all across the world as well, right? But B, also the calculation of the money that is given to the origin country will be proportionate to the amount and level of investments that these countries have put towards these athletes, right? Things like not only monetary things, but like time, efforts, for example, the amount of coaching that they have given, paying for trainings, etc. as well, for example, or like paying for courts for these athletes to be able to train in those areas, for example, right? But see, there's still room for negotiation, right? Since both countries will need to agree upon it, will need to agree upon the fee that is going to be given to the origin country, because the country that wants to buy those athletes, like for example, the Netherlands wants to buy athletes from Indonesia, for example, they really want to get those athletes because they know that they are good to for them to be naturalized, right? There's still then power from this origin country to reject if it's unfair or for them to negotiate in one type of or another, right? Yeah, now that has got out of the way, I'm going to explain on why is it necessary for you to enforce this fee towards the country that wants to buy athletes from another country, for example, and what is the urgency, right? On two things. A, because this ensures that fair compensation for the origin country's club, right? For example, since these countries have invested significant time, efforts, and also resources, since most of these athletes have been trained since they were young, for example, since they were like 8 to 10, for example, into developing these players from those young ages until they are sought out by other countries, right? It means they're good enough. It means they were trained to be really good for them to be able to be seen by other countries, for them to want to be bought by other countries, to be naturalized, for example, right? But B, this also prevents other countries from losing their talents without proper compensation, because opposition might say is that, oh, this already exists as well as a framework in the current status quo, but we say this needs to be enacted as a rule that is enforced by this international federation to actually be monitored and enforced by everyone, right? Why is then those things justified for these countries to pay the money, right? Because of three things. Because firstly, naturalization is symmetrical to brain drain, because there's opportunity cost in there in those athletes, right? Now that the player is gone, they can lose another alternative that they could get those resources they could get or gain those capital from, right? Why is this true? Because the athletes that are good are going to be the ones that are sought out by other countries, right? These other countries would not want to go through the hassle of naturalizing an athlete if they don't think that these athletes are indeed good enough at the end of the day, right? They want they would not want to pay for a moderately good or underperforming athlete as well, right? So indeed, in here there is that demand for the athlete from Indonesia to be bought by the Netherlands, for example, or from South Africa towards France, for example, etc. Right? But secondly, it's because athletes are also assets to the country, because these athletes attract media attention. For example, they can attract sponsorships. This means they can generate revenue towards the country, since sports fans, especially like football, for example, they have very avid fans all around the world that would pay, for example, to fly over the country to just see that one player that they love, for example, right? So this means they would lose that revenue now that the player is gone, right? But thirdly, there's also scarcity of resources that these countries cannot control, that they cannot give towards these athletes at the end of the day, right? Because things like countries like the global south, like Indonesia, for example, like Malaysia, etc., are victims of colonialisms, right? These countries had their resources and human resources as well exploited by those other bigger countries, like in the Europe, for example, in America, etc. This makes it a challenge for them to actually continue to grow and still be a developing country until now, right? This means B, the exploitation of there's also the exploitation of capitalism and also unfair competition that exists in the current status quo as well, right? There's a concentration of resources and there's so much economic power that are way saturated in those Western countries like America and Europe, right? This makes poorer countries harder to allocate their resources into their athletes. This is not the country's fault anyway for them to be colonized at the very first place. But before that, can I take one from CO?
I have one if you want.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, under your side, athletes can still choose. Why then, under your side, people are more likely going to pay to move to Indonesia rather than playing in Netherlands?
I don't see there's a need for our athletes to be naturalized. We just think that if this happens, there's that framework to ensure that these countries get compensation. We're not saying that, oh, there's going to be more naturalization or there's not going to be any naturalization anyway, right? Yeah, I hope that's clear. But also, there's that exploitation that happens from this bigger country, right? This exists from richer countries where where they can persuade top level athletes to represent them for the reason of better opportunities, they have better facilities, and also a lot of financial incentives that these poorer countries cannot give towards those athletes. This is not the lack of effort from the smaller countries, but just due to all of the externalities that I have told you before. What is then the most benefit under our side? Because we can impose this policy to help these countries to get capital for the development of their local athletes. Whereas poorer countries, because they have difficulties in providing their top athletes with the framework, right? With this rule, they can get those money to then gain more capital to be able to allocate those resources into these athletes that they have in their local vicinity, right? What does that look like? Because we need to ensure the league survivability, right? We need funding to ensure that the club will exist in the current status quo. Like in Indonesia, it's very hard to maintain a football club, for example, because it's inherently something that's very expensive, right? We can allocate those resources for that as well. But secondly, we need more money for development. Things like more money to hire coaches, buy facilities, and create programs. Because indeed, that money is going to be something that's comparatively very big, right? Because I've explained to you, there's that bargaining power from these smaller countries to be able to negotiate with these bigger countries. Those money are going to be allocated to build better facilities, build better goalposts or anything. Yeah, proud to propose.
Yeah, thank you for the very fine speech. Calling upon leader of opposition. Here.
Hello, I'm audible.
You are.
Okay. Let me start my timer. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna start this debate by saying that we don't think that when a player gets naturalized or temporarily naturalized by a country or by a nation, the nation that are responsible for that naturalization shouldn't be held responsible and accountable to pay a prolonged compensation towards the player country of origin, right? A little bit of characteristic from OO. 3 things. First, with the context at hand, we believe that in this specific motion, the player that got naturalized or maybe temporarily naturalized would be playing and representing as a national team. This is because it took effort and money to by a nation in order to naturalize international player, right? So they would, for example, they would have to pay that international player a lot more amount of money in comparison to homegrown player. It's harder to scout international player, etc. Hence why they won't be playing at some small team in that specific country, but instead would be directed to be a part of the national team, right? Second thing, naturalization or temporary naturalization. What is it, right? I don't think government explained this. This is actually where a player chooses to uphold other country citizenship with the purpose to become an athlete or to be able to play in their national team. This means that if a player got naturalized into the Indonesian national team, they would have Indonesian citizenship for the amount of time that they play in this country, or even if after they're not playing anymore, they choose to coach in this country or to live in this country, right? Thirdly, what circumstances that someone want to move away from the country in order to play in another nation's national team, right? There's a lot of motives. Specifically, there's 2 important motives, which is financial motive, because as an international player that play in a smaller country, you would get more financial compensation. And B, for personal reason, which is connection. Maybe they feel a connection with this country. Some of them maybe share inherit this country genetics whatsoever, and they would feel a sense of belonging, which mean or maybe they would have personal reason, or something like the potential for them to be something in smaller country is higher than and better, rather than being an average player in a country. They could be a superstar in the other, right? A lot of motives. A little bit of response to OG. I think what I get from OG speech is that they think that naturalization is a potential for brain drain. I want to say no to this. Naturalization is not a form of brain drain, and I'm going to explain why naturalization is important to talk about in this debate later in my first argument. Because we know that players that are being naturalized are players that comes from country that could afford to lose that player and could afford to let other country naturalize that player, specifically because they have a higher country of origin already have a high inventory of talents. Country that entered the deal to give up their player won't also give up their star player if the national team is reliant on that talent. Hence why it would not be counted as brain drain, right? Moving on to my first argument. My first argument reads, why paying compensation actually have bad impact on the actor involved. I have 2 layers. First layer is it would lessen the incentive for country to naturalize player. Why is this so harmful? Why is this so harmful for smaller country to lack the incentivization to naturalize player, like a little preemptive for the government. Maybe government want to argue that it is good that this incentivification happen, because now this small country could focus on producing their own grass-grown player, right? But what government didn't think and what government didn't consider in this specific subject and doesn't think about is when this happens, smaller country that want to neutralize player is probably country with little to no sports influence internationally or no sport present internationally. Meaning, when there's more prohibition for naturalization to happen, the potential for that country to have a proliferation in the aspect of their sports would be worse. Meaning, it would be worse not only for the country but also the homegrown athlete from that smaller country, because it would be harder for them to enter the international market. In government side, homegrown athlete that's supposed to be a vulnerable actor, those athletes that they want to protect so much and they think are vulnerable and should have enough facility, would have a harder time to qualify for international league, because they didn't have enough access to be able to enter the international league. That's why naturalization is specifically important for growing nation or developing country that still have no sport present in the international league, right? Second layer, there's two impact here that we should talk about: the impact and connection to poor country, and the impact and connection to rich
Hi.
country, right? Yes, please.
You consider that athletes will only go to big countries anyway, so why would developing countries can catch up with sports?
Okay, so athlete would not just go to big country, and this would furthermore this would my DLO is going to talk about the link between a bigger country or richer country on the grand scheme of things, while I'm going to talk about the impact and contribution of and the link of poor country in my speech specifically, right? Linking to my last layer, it would be so much harder for poor country that are indeed in need of the proliferation to be able to access player that could also mentor their own homegrown player, right? This is bad specifically because exchange of knowledge would be harder to access, right? Exchange of knowledge between player that are already considered a professional from a bigger country and player that are from development country would have a harder way to exchange knowledge. This is specifically important because sport should be a social thing. Sport should be a catalyst for skill exchange and not simply be viewed as something or like as a competition between country. Yes, there is a benefit for sport to be viewed as a competition, but it shouldn't be the only thing that sport is as a catalyst, right? But it is much more, but this exchange of knowledge will be much more limited if the government side believe in this proposition, right? Second argument, short argument. How this interacts with fan and investor and sponsor would be worse specifically in government side, because the link with their with the fans would be lessened, because now the country that are being paid by other nation would be seen as someone as a country that are selling or like actively selling their player, right? That's why fans would get disappointed, and hence why this motion should fall. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the very fine speech calling upon the Deputy Prime Minister here.
I'm audible?
Yeah.
Okay. POI directly through unmuting yourself, preferably from CO. I think it's assumptive for all to say that smaller countries has a limited amount of athletes inside their state, right? They give a very conflicting characterization, saying that big countries will always naturalize athletes anyway. This implies to you two things. First of all, that athletes from small countries will always be poached to bigger countries as well. This argument clashes with my PM's entire characterization about brain drain already, right? Because it simply becomes harder for smaller countries to develop their own sports if you keep on losing a lot of your good talents, for instance, right? Because most likely, if there is naturalization happening, all of these big countries, they're not stupid. They will only pick the potential athletes, for instance. We're talking about emerging athletes, we're talking about up and rising athletes who do have the skill set to compete in a larger scale, right? Therefore, if it is hard for these developing countries to catch up with them because they have limited resources, for instance, because they have limited facilities and whatnot, it becomes even harder in the opening opposition, because not only do these big countries are able to catch like all of these good athletes, but there is no financial compensation being provided to these origin states. Therefore, they do not have the money to actually develop their own local athletes as well, because you have limited capital under their side. But secondly, then I think even if their benefit about transfer of knowledge is important, leagues will still exist to hold competitions anyway. There will always be interactions between different states because you have different regional or international competitions. For instance, for you to have those like different interactions between athletes as well as like local athletes with international athletes. Therefore, it is able to wash out most of opening opposition's benefit, talking about, oh, we're able to develop better athletes, for instance. They never prove why these smaller states will be able to have that money to actually create those facilities, to actually hire coaches, which comparatively is way better than our side of the house because you have those financial compensation, right? But secondly, this also wash out the entire argument about people satisfaction or fan satisfaction when they watch sports anyway, because they're able to prove to you, like with financial compensation, this is exactly why the audiences that comes from smaller countries will be able to feel more pride when you know that there is a chance for your athletes to actually win in bigger competitions, right? This is not a debate about the bigger states, because if we want to talk about France, US, China, for instance, they will always have the money to naturalize athletes anyway. They will always have the money to actually play in a good game, which is why they're not the vulnerable actor in this debate. But why then demanding compensation significantly disincentivizes naturalization and therefore equalizes the competition in our side of the house, right? Directly engaged with most points from OO if you want to talk about these states as well. I think first of all, naturalization is likely to be very expensive because logically, countries who want to acquire up and rising athletes or good athletes, the quality of athletes, i.e., their skill sets, their experience, or their reputation is good, the financial compensation will be proportionate. This is likely to manifest in two main ways. That A, rich countries such as France or US will still naturalize athletes, but the financial compensation is needed to pay back these origin states the money that they deserve for losing a very precious asset in the end, right? This is important to prove two main things. That first of all, compensation is crucial so that rich countries repair the damages that they've already historically inflicted onto these poor countries, right? Opposition cannot argue about disadvantage in economies of scale because disparity will always exist in their world of status quo. But why is it even worse than their side, right? Because the comparative is that not only do rich countries will always get all of the good players because they're rich, but origin states also do not receive any financial compensation for losing their athletes, for losing a lot of human resources, which it is not unlimited anyway, right? Because there's always going to be limited resources in good athletes that you have, in the potentials that you have, which is why it's so important for us to make sure that we view these assets as important as possible. But secondly, then we're able to co-opt most of what was benefit about choice or about like better training and better facilities, because naturalization is a process that would happen. We guarantee that the betterment, because rich countries who have large interest to treat these athletes as good as possible to maximize this potential already exists. But secondly, then I think if we debate on the basis of financial fair play, it's more likely than not for countries to refrain from naturalizing athletes because the cost is so high, but the certainty of output is low. This is likely to be true because up and rising athletes don't always win new competitions anyway. Look at Indonesia, right? We naturalized a lot of Netherlands football athletes, but we still lost in the World Cup qualifiers against China with a lot of local athletes. But secondly, then, in instances where money is involved in these athletes will simply increase more incentive for developing countries to invest in local athletes because you know that it's very expensive for you to spend money to naturalize talents from other states as well, right? This directly answers your POI about where you should play sports in the end. This is likely to happen because of three reasons. A, because sports is so competitive, even states like Indonesia invest a lot in football. Even states like Africa, they invest a lot in sports, etc. Talented individuals or talented athletes are more likely going to stay inside your national team exactly because you want to make it more competitive and make the competition more equalized, right? We're talking about athletes such as Gareth Bale from Wales, rejected to play for England, right? Players such as Luka Modric, for instance, from Croatia, rejected to play for Bosnia. A lot of Moroccan teams are actually local athletes who actually get feel more pride, for instance, when they got into the semifinals of World Cups last year or I forgot when. But this is like to be true because of the reason that A, because you have cultural incentive for you to stay inside your own country, because you feel pride with your nationality. This is what happens a lot to like expedites, for instance, and you feel more pride for you to actually represent your own country. But secondly, then this is also what creates more attachment towards your country, right? Because you know that you are born there, your family is in the origin state, etc., which is why it's likely for you to want to stay. But secondly, then because you want to inspire local athletes as well, because you're the star athlete inside your own country. But when you are naturalized to a lot of different states, for instance, you're no longer the best player, which is why you do not get the satisfaction as an athlete as well. But secondly, then we also mitigate the risk of mistreatment for local athletes comparatively to what happened on opposition. Because you glorify foreign athletes to naturalization because there's a widespread messaging that discourages these local athletes to actually want to engage in sports. Before that, closing.
Yeah, we think that under status quo, a lot of players proliferate through external clubs. Why then should country take all the credit?
Here's the thing, right? You get proliferated with naturalization because even if you get proliferated with naturalization, you lose a lot of athletes. It is unfair then for a lot of these small states because not only do you lose the human resources, but you get no financial compensation for you to develop your own state as well. But secondly, then there's no other options for these countries to do naturalization. That is the reason why you would want to centralize a lot of your focus and a lot of your capital on local athletes. This is true because of the reason that numbers. Sports represents the nation's identity in tournaments. Countries do want to do good, knowing how sports has become a lot of existing regulation to limit naturalization or to mandate for a lot of homegrown athletes to play in the field. There's necessities for government to develop their own athletes. But third, because sports also caters to a huge market, citizens' demand is high and it's a prerequisite to getting sponsorship, to getting media attention, to get tourism, etc., which is why profit incentive is able to drive this government to comply as well. You want to invest more in local athletes, to hire coaches, to buy facilities, to build infrastructure, and etc. Therefore, athletes who don't get naturalized get better catered under our side to ensure fair play and distributed development. Why is the weighing important, right? Because our contribution will win us over any benches to explain how competition can be equalized. That's what guarantees fair play. That's what guarantees better development for sports as well. Propose.
Yeah, we thank the mayor for the very fine speech calling upon DLO to close the opening bench. Here.
Okay. Okay, I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Unmute to POI or in chat also works. Either ways. Yeah. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Panels, there are 2 scenarios in which a player will engage when they want to move countries. I think first they would move either from the first world country, such as Netherlands, to Indonesia. So Netherlands player want to contribute to Indonesia exactly because there is cultural involvement, like they feel attached. This is what Kay already brought to you. This is more likely going to happen because there's urgency, especially for developing nations such as Indonesia, who is starting to proliferate in sports. Second scenario is talking about OG scenario. They come from third world country and suddenly, for example, African player which has a French descent who suddenly want to play in France national team, such as player like Kylian Mbappe or Ousmane Dembele. But these players are already inside the European League anyway. They're already a part of the league for a very long time. They are proliferated there. That is how they become good. That is how they get their name. So highly good players that are already developed actually get developed by their own clubs, such as, like, for example, Manchester United, or their own respective team that has no attachment at all to the state. So we think that you, as state, you cannot just simply take credit. This is, for example, how Cristiano Ronaldo moved to 5 different clubs, but Manchester United make him get the most self-development. And that's not even in the Spain, that's actually UK. So Spain cannot steal all of the credit and say, oh, you should pay for compensation, even though 5 different clubs partake in this person's career development. Second, I think that even if like rich country want to poach, I think they already have too much resource. So this kills likelihood from OG. Several rebuttal then towards OG. First rebuttal, they want to say that they want to get fair compensation because athletes have been trained from very young. First, athletes are self-fund. I don't think that any country have the urgency to suddenly want to pay for the for the development. Even if they want to, I don't think the development is good. That's why in Indonesia you have, like, for example, PB Jarum, which is actually privately owned. Second, they said that good players will be stolen from their opportunity. If the player is that good, such as what OG portrayed to you, if they is that popular, can be the face of the country, they will have high market price. I think that they should also get better wage and the revenue and like I think the contract will be symmetrical to what they're getting. I think in the end, later, athletes have rational decision making. If they get significantly more than being naturalized, then we think that they should prioritize their own well-being. But if what OG say is true, they can be the face of the country. I think they will get they should get symmetrical offer anyways, right? Third, talking about DPM's case, about the love for your country. This is not exclusive. You also have choice under our side. But I think choice is better exactly because you don't get caught in, for example, the bureaucracy of having to pay compensation. If you really love, for example, your attachment to Indonesia, you can play there without needing, for example, to pay more compensation. Several characterization. I think government might run arguments like, oh, nation should pay compensation, especially if they come from third world country and they're poached into first world country. This directly engage with OG's POI to my PM. Two response to this. First, I think sports infrastructure and development in third world country is less likely going to be progressive compared to first world country. This kills their livelihood because things like stadium, gym, club, and etc., the chances of player moving from third world country to first world country is less likely. But second, if so, I think that there's going to be scouting that exists from private club like Manchester United wanting to scout and put their own resource, put their own money. I don't think that state can steal this justification and steal this credit, suddenly saying that, oh, they should play for us instead, right? Just because they are born there does not mean that you take all the credit because you're not the one who pay and be directly involved in this person's development. Like, even if first country can poach, such as what DPM says, this is still unjust. We think that emerging athletes are proliferated through football clubs around the world. Yeah, basically the same characterization. Going to my first argument then. Why does the freedom to choose which country you play to, it matters a lot, and it should be within your own autonomy. I think government team has to prove why then it is justified for the country of origin to be compensated. This means that they are directly involved, but there's no proof of that because we already proved to you that all of this development from you're a child, from, for example, the moment when you join your own club, you pay with your own money. Your parents is the one who fund you, right? This means you're self-funded. You're not attached to your country at all. This is unjust for three reasons, and it directly kicks government from this debate. First, most likely, country does not pay for this person's development. Second, exactly when athletes are self-funded and self-developed at a certain age, they should have their autonomy on decision-making because they already invested in themselves. They should have the full choice on where they want to play, where they want to enhance their career in, for example. Because the moment when buying a player becomes too expensive, I don't think, like, for example, country will not buy. So I do agree that this debate is not going to run on poor country because they won't have purchasing power anyway. Instead, I think it would be this motion is more strategically run and talked about in situation like Indonesia, where we have emerging capacity in sports and we have purchasing power to do so. But then, yeah, going to my second argument, why this acts as a form of compensation. This is similar to OG's case, but OG's case talks about why compensation exists if there's a rich country stealing from underdeveloped country, which is not likely going to happen. What I explained to you, they lose on this likelihood, and yeah, but they also bring about Indonesia's progress versus China. I don't think that even if country lose, I think that's still okay because at least much more progress that exists under our side. The moment when you have proliferation, the moment when you have external new players with better capacity, with better skills, this is exactly when they're able to contribute. This is exactly the fans are more excited. There are more sponsors going to exist. This means that, for example, fans attraction, for example, they want to buy more tickets into the stadium and etc. For now, then let's talk about form of compensation. I think for far too long, sports has been a social status for many countries to be able to get a better political stance. I.e., the better your country perform in international events, the better stature and global standing that you have. This is, for example, Qatar. They host the World Cup several years ago, and for example, they're able to get. I think that third world country to begin with are the most vulnerable actor who has been struggling, even though try as hard. They've never been able to qualify to World Cup, for example. This is why the moment when Indonesia is able to naturalize so many better players, let's say, we think that at least Indonesia has better chance. At least Indonesia gets its benefit from, for example, fan interaction, from people more supporting and believing in Indonesia's national team, for example. And yeah, at least Indonesia has much better global standing now. While I think that these countries already get a head start. Like, for example, colonially, already have better stadium. While in Indonesia, there's only GBK, they have 10 different stadiums. They have so I think in terms of compensation, this is much more likely going to happen, and this is just because we've been historically marginalized. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, all, for the very great speech. Calling upon the closing image now, starting from member of government here.
Hi, audible and visible?
Mm.
Okay. POI just unmute, I guess. Take one from opening. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. In what instances exactly naturalization is done? Naturalization is done exactly not because you have no population, because even Iceland, which probably smaller than Jakarta in population, never use any naturalized player, but they still pass World Cup and European qualification. So I think mostly the country who did naturalization is because they are lacking of human resources quality locally as a result of bad bureaucracy, bad training development, etc. This mostly happen in developing world. What differentiates ourselves from opening government? Opening government claim that its policy is used for proliferating naturalization, in which opening oppositions criticize this idea entirely because it's not supporting local people. I agree. So therefore, the angle that closing government going to take is why this policy actually prevent further naturalization to happening and build a more systematic approach to local community. Because once again, your main obligations as a state relies on your people who pay more tax to you, and therefore you must develop the local community first. CG will win this debate by vertically establishing one, the process of naturalization, and two, why it harms athlete well-being in general in opening oppositions. But once again, two framing to outframe the entirety of opening debate. Number one, I'm not going to say this is knifing, yeah, but I think if you're opening government debating in a bad faith, then I think it's by virtue closing government has the rights to recontextualize the debate, right? Because the losing talents arguments that DPM run generally backlash with their PM's characterizations. Because if PM said most of the poor countries such as Africa talents were bad, then developed countries such as Netherlands are unlikely anyway to naturalize them. So I think opening government must be consistent within their characterization in what instances and in what country you are likely to doing naturalization. Otherwise, their case is causing you visible confusions. And I want to know, this is damning to opening government case, because I think if the PM characterization is true, then no need to use local development as what DPM claim, because no country will naturalize your talents. But if DPM characterization is true, if most of the developing countries' talents were good, then no need to do naturalization at all. You had good training regime, good training system, etc. This is true, especially considering DPM also said that even developing country investing a lot of money on sport development, therefore they have much more money to employ better coaching staffs, data analysis, etc. So that means like pretty much the case from opening government is not consistent, and so does opening oppositions as well. Because the entirety of opening oppositions case is pretty much negative case, right? They do not propose any counter proposal. They do not propose why you can suddenly reduce the intensity of naturalizations that is happening on your side of the house, especially considering that the process of naturalizations right now in the current status quo is very, very flexible, right? In which most of the administration process is going to be easily passed by a lot of House of Representatives member because they consider that, oh, naturalizations brings good result and etc. And I think leader of opposition sort of consider to this claim when they say the person who are likely to be naturalized is not going to be superstar, people who probably do not get placed in their national team. So therefore, they want to be the superstar in the naturalized country, right? So therefore, when this is a proposal motion, I think it's not enough for opening options to just put a lot of negative cases. And I think by the virtue of that alone, they even cannot prevent the naturalizations happening on their side by structural reasons. And here's where I want to directly jump into my first contributions, which is how you directly prevent the process of naturalization and developing talents. Probably Jason will extend more on this because too much housekeeping and opening debate. So what was exactly the purpose of you doing naturalization? The purpose is to ensure that you can get the best talents from elsewhere, and mostly where the talents came from. The best talents mostly came from Europe, in countries such as France, Netherlands, etc. I think they got very, very good talents, right? And I think opening opening options cannot claim, oh, but you contribute pretty much in a lot of different leagues as well, like Cristiano Ronaldo, and therefore it's unfair if most of the money is going to be allocated only in Spain. Yeah, sure, but Cristiano Ronaldo can only play in Big Five league after probably like 20 years. In the process of when he was still young, he mostly play and get like facility coming from Portuguese government. So I think like it's unclear to me to what extent why the Portuguese government then do not deserve that tax. So what I'm going to explain in this debate is if the process of naturalization is very, very expensive, as what opening options prove in the debate, then I'll win in local development. Why? Because I think in developing country, you do not need to naturalize only in one specific sport branch, right? You have pretty much a lot of things to cover up. You need to cover up things such as badminton. You need to cover up things such as volleyball, basketball, football, etc. Because you have no talents at all in this country specifically. And what does that entail is that in opening oppositions, you are going to create a much more saturated world because the process of you specifically doing the administration or bureaucratic process is easier, then it's going to be easier for you to do naturalizations in their side of the house. That means it's mostly kill the local talents, because the gap in between developing country and developed nation like France and Europe is pretty much huge. Like you can see this in Indonesia right now. Even the third tier divisions can just directly step in and replace the starting 11 in Indonesia. So this generally shows that the gap is pretty much huge, right? And I think if the process of naturalizations was inherently good, and I think in the most cases when there was no compensation or there was no certain fee that you must pay to other nations, then you are likely to do this again and again. And this is a process that killed the local developments in opening oppositions. So that means like in closing government, this at least act as a barrier. Because I think if the players that you are going to naturalize was very good and then can directly bring changes, then the nations that is originated from that players will put higher price to you specifically. And it could be a consideration because most of the sport federation naturally have limited resources. Yeah, before that opening.
Yeah, why is local development so exclusive? Why you cannot have that at the same time as when you naturalize player?
Oh, because the resources were once again limited, right? And I think this is very, very important because if you're not having that much resources, then where that money came from? That money came from when you take the budget to develop local leagues to entirely buy and naturalize players in your side of the house. And that means like this is true exactly because now in our side of the house, when there is a certain barrier, you must ensure that the process of check and balance do manifest better in closing government. Because now whenever a government want to spend their money on naturalizing players, the people must criticize, right? The people must involve in the discussions whether this player is actually good or not. And I think now government wouldn't probably have more incentive to naturalize player over and over again. And this was the reasons why developing leagues under our side of the house is very good, because now whenever the budgets were likely to allocate it in local league, then mostly people are gonna have the better facilities, are gonna have better competitions overall, because now the local players can exactly flourish once again, because most of the local players were not inherently bad because they got very, very underwhelming performance simply because they mostly cannot perform in most cases because they have no facilities, because they have no sponsorship, etc. And I think it's our duty as government to help them while we are making the process of nationalization become difficult in most cases. So, propose.
Thank you for the very fine speech calling upon member of opposition here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
POI preference is just speak when I was speaking, and because I cannot see the chat. If I ignore it, that means that I did not take your POI. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think that all of the government cases are too simplistic in our point of view because they establish that when you use players from another country, when you naturalize players from another country, it leaves no place for development for your own players, as if naturalization is not done by these governments to create a better sports playing environment, to create a better playing environment in their own countries. So we think that there are several goals to naturalization that must be considered when a country tries to take over a player of their descent from another country. The first is that they want their country to have better exposure in the international sporting environment to showcase that, hey, we have the capability of do sports and we have the capability of doing sports right. And the second is to bolster the sporting culture in their own countries by giving the people in the country a chance to witness how better how better the playing style is, how better the mechanism is when you are confronted with players that play outside of your country with European sporting style and technique brought over to Indonesia, for example. But we will tackle the government's case head on with two primary arguments demonstrating why naturalization without having to pay should be necessary, and how the local sporting culture, sporting development will still happen, and this is not exclusive in the opportunity type. So the first is the country should not benefit from someone's personal choice and hard work. We think that it's morally wrong for government to benefit from the hard work of someone who spend their whole childhood, their whole money and effort to be a professional footballer when they give minimal support at all to these footballers. What I mean is, who are you gonna pay the money to? European countries benefit from football culture and leagues that are built organically with little government intervention. Like these clubs are owned by professional investors from other developed countries such as the UK, USA, or even the Gulf Arab countries. So if that's anyone who will fulfill the most wealth, it is them. We think that it's morally wrong for governments to hinder the career progress of a player when they make their own choice. It's when you Indonesia to pay the Netherlands, then Indonesia will not want to take these players because they have to pay in the first place, even though the players want that in the first place. This will damage the sport of the origin country, you think, because now they have less choice. And therefore, less people will be willing to be professional athletes in the origin country. For example, in the Netherlands, the athletes' costs are limited. The national team's costs are limited. So you need to be on the very top of everyone to make the cut for the Netherlands national team. It means the opportunity is limited. And when you limit that opportunity, you are inherently stifling the development of football in the Netherlands in the first place because now they think that they cannot get young players who are descended from another country. For example, Kylian Mbappe in France, and maybe the most of the Indonesian players from the Netherlands who are descended from another country. They cannot get the exposure they need to have in international play in order to advance their career. So this will be harming to the player to the national team player active in the first place. And representing another country is a choice they made of their own volition. Why? Because they feel like they will profit more the destination country than the original country. So it's a rational decision made by them. And I think in principle, this should be a very, very morally wrong case, and it cannot be supported in the first place. And the second is, we think that we should prevent sports from being a purely business and keep competition happening in sports, in national team sports worldwide. So under the status quo, countries naturalize players because the players want it in the first place and the country to benefit from that exposure. They will have so many benefits and the country wants it because it will boost the sport ranking and generate more exposure, right? We want to wholly flip government's argument and say that giving barriers to naturalization would actually increase the cost of sports and make sports running like a business in the end of the day, while you should have done it for the benefit of your local people and your national team spectators. Why? Because eventually, when you set barriers like you have to pay, the incentive of athletes wanting to move to another country because they will get personal benefit, exposure, etc., will be gone. Since countries don't want to afford it, therefore, the only moment a country will even bother with naturalization is when they want to get the best players only. But how is this a problem? Under the FIFA status quo, you can naturalize players from anywhere. For example, when Indonesia naturalized Christian Gonzalez from Uruguay, he has no Indonesian blood or descent. If you make the whole naturalization system as you can pay for however you want, then this will just incentivize developing countries who are rich, like United Arab Emirates, like China, etc., to buy whoever they want, even if they have no relation to the country. In effect, countries are run like a league club, like a professional sports club. This will be likely because now the incentive of getting fame, the personal relative of another country is thrown out of the window. So the players will not be incentivized by the fact that the destination country has to spend their money wisely. So why don't they go to the very best players from other countries anyway? No matter if they have no relation to the original country, countries with less resources like Indonesia will still lose in the end. And on the bottom line, we think that there is still a desire for naturalization anyway. You cannot take this out, and countries will pay however much they want for another country's players, since those countries will benefit from it. As the CG has said, first they want to use sports watching to bolster the image of their own country, like Qatar. So in effect, if you allow Qatar to buy anyone they want from any country, they will just collect the very best players like a football club and just do it to create better exposure and to cover up the bad things that happen in the country. And eventually, because Qatar is a rich developing country, other developing countries like Indonesia will have less resources to compete with them. So we think that given a similar set of resources, every country will want to naturalize players because there is such an inherent economic benefit on naturalization that you cannot gain anywhere else. But we will prove to you how local talent can still be developed even in the framework of naturalization. We will say that this is not a stupid because when players from other countries player from the origin country play for the destination country. They help bolster the image of how a better sport, a better sport environment, a better sport technique, and playing field should look like, and how it could appear in their countries. Furthermore, since these players are changing their nationality in the end, at the end of their career, they will move to these destination countries in the first place and help the local leagues with their talent because their trade is football. Where else would they take that football experience? Because they now cannot return back to their original countries because they have been citizens of this country. So we think that all the benefits can manifest in outside better. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the very fine speech calling upon Government Whip here.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Echo. There's an echo.
But
Can you
still
try
audible,
to?
right?
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay, I'm very sorry, it's quite echoey. My roommate is already returned to his room, so I do the debate in the kitchen instead. Right. Wait, where's my timer? Okay, here I unmute and I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. What we want in CG is that to reduce the over-reliance of developing countries wanting to develop, instead of developing their players, they just wanted to do the naturalization. This is the inherent tendency of the developing countries because they see developing their local talents is something that is difficult, as something that is not worth investing. Therefore, they take the shortcut of recruiting naturalized players in and of itself, abandoning their own people and their own base to ensure that they get small short-term gratification to begin with. This is what CG wanted, and I will analyze why this identity is inherently winning from all three teams. Starting from OG, because I think it is important to establish the difference. Because OG said they want that the original countries is losing talented players, therefore they deserve compensation. However, this analysis is contingent on the framing that OG brought, that naturalization mostly done by developed countries like France or Germany. That is why they can call it a neocolonialism to begin with. However, this is unlikely to be true because if the talent management system is so bad that it needs more money just to survive, as what PM said, then by no means the academy are in position to produce good talents to be recruited by the developed countries, especially considering that the developed countries in and of itself has much more superior academy system which would produce much more quality human resources to begin with. Therefore, what most likely happens is that the developing countries are taking shortcut for short-term success by poaching the rising young talent from the developed academies, not the other way around. With this in mind, the Brian's case on talent management becomes much more important in the debate for three reasons. One, the development of local talents by developing countries is seen much more difficult because you have to do the reform from the ground up, right? There is bad management system, there is bad training, there is bad data analysis, and pouring money simply won't solve the problem. You have to reform the entire system of the sports association in and of itself. Therefore, while the incentive to win still exists, the nation have the incentive to take the instant route by recruiting the players from the developed countries in and of itself. While this happens, the local talents become abandoned because they think that they can rely on with the naturalized talent in and of itself. This is inherently bad, both principally as one, the nation have the moral responsibility to their own people, as Brian already posits, but two, the naturalized players in and of itself is simply unfair, because to be able to be naturalized by countries like Indonesia, there is birth lottery involved, right? Your parents must be married to random countries, random developed countries like Germany, for example. Then you are brought to Germany, for example, to reap the benefits of a much more developed academy system. And then you are just going to return back to your old country, while the academy, who has nurtured them all their life, received absolutely nothing. But also, this also harmful, but practically for the nation itself, as they shoot themselves in the foot, as they need local talents for making it sustainable. Because the system of naturalization with all the bureaucratic red tape is simply unsustainable in and of itself, and that the local talents is much more abundant to begin with. Therefore, it should have been easier if they want to reform and look at themselves in the mirror, right? But instead, they abandon these local potentials to just play amateurly in concrete streets. This is exactly why naturalization must be limited. But secondly, this also harms the academy, which nurtured the naturalized player in and of itself, right? Because there is the reward system for the club academy. If you can produce more national players for your own country, then the National Sport Association will have the incentive to reward the academy with more investment. But the existence of naturalization itself impedes this process, as the young potential players suddenly change nationality, reducing the potential for academy receiving more investment for the national sport. But thirdly, this also harms the original nation, as the reason they invest in academy to begin with is to develop future talents. But the talents are being poached left and right by the developing countries. Therefore, they are unable to develop the system better of itself. How should we weigh the two government bench contribution, right? Because I think the contribution on us is much better, because one, principally you are benefited, therefore you must pay the original country in and of itself, right? But secondly, practically, it will reduce the incentive for you to do naturalization to begin with, therefore this can be compensated. But so even if the naturalization still exists, it's still limited to recruit just one or two best players. Moving on to the next team, CO. They say about choice and agency, and this is important and whatnot. One, this is something that is symmetrical on both sides, as you can choose to just reject returning to your old country in and of itself. But secondly, even if this is not symmetric to begin with, that agency is limited on our side, this is good. As I said, because as I said, the naturalized players are born out of cynic parents trying to reap the benefits from the developed countries in and of itself. If you cannot just move to a new country and being naturalized, then you have to defend the country which has developed you, which has trained you in and of itself. And this is a much more morally sound way for you to pay back to the actors that have developed you the most. But lastly, regarding OO, they talk about how this will reduce the incentive for naturalization, which is bad for local development. One, this argument is only true if the incentive to do development is something that is exclusively done through the naturalization process itself. It does not. You can recruit new coaches and whatnot, for example. But even if so, naturalization is the exact thing that is impeding the development itself. So therefore, this completely flips the argumentation from therefore, their argument cannot stand, as the short-term benefit is not going to be sustaining.
Thank you for the very fine speech, calling upon opposing whip to cause the whole debate here.
Sorry, can I take like 2 minutes to go to the toilet, please?
Sure.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay. Um, okay, so POF preference, if you just directly unmute because I will not be looking at the chat box for even the Zoom. And so my proper pronouns are she, they, or gender as anything. And so I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judges paying a country is not the only way for them to develop their own market for football or any other sport. On our side, we will champion the exposure gained by these athletes representing these bigger countries who will donate their good name towards their own country, showing them that they are valuable athletes in the underdeveloped country. This inspires people in the country to actually try to develop football or any other sports in existence in itself because they believe that there are human resources in order to develop the enough human resources to develop the talent in their country, whether they're third world, second world, or first world country. The money would exist regardless if you want to pay them or not, because regardless, again, I think we all agree that most clubs are private because of their own characterization. Sports is a business, and within the principle of business, the most advantage they can get is the first business advantage. If they say third world countries are so poor, then we would assume that there are also rich people in the country with the political and business incentive to develop a club, because again, it is a very big business that they can capitalize based on the exposure they already have. This is something that all the other benches missed, and this is why I see always we champion a more organic development of the sports within the country by the natural exposure we get from the athletes that develop outside the country. Although they represent another nation, we believe they still represent their own nationality, where they came from, because at the end of the day, people still will still recognize the country that they came from, regardless if they represent friends, especially even if they come from Africa. It doesn't matter because it's their background, and that is detrimental to who they are today. Their nation has no say where these football players should advance their career, because again, it is a conscious and rational choice made by the players in order to advance their own career. It is a fact in the sports industry that these players would seek the most advantageous position regardless. If it is moving out of the country to another football league or others, the nation has no say. It is an individual's choice and the right to be able to choose their own career progression, even if it means representing another country, because at the end of the day, they still represent their own original nationality background that will never be separate from who they are today and in the future. These athletes who represent their own country are trained from private clubs. They come to represent their country because they are the best of the best, not because the country trained them to do so, but because were trained by private institutions, like, for example, badminton athletes from the Jarum. There is no incentive for the country to suddenly be responsible for all the development that has happened so far on the athletes. When it happens in a private sector, that is an entirely separate body from the country. All benches completely miss that. What is the urgency for the countries to represent private clubs to suddenly pay at the federations just because they represent their country? This is completely something that is missed by CG, and so there's no urgency or not even a likelihood for the country to actually pay. And so we think that the entire government bench falls. Local development is not exclusive on the government side, and it will be worse on their side, because at the end of the day, there's again no incentive for the country to pay FIBA this sort of fee, because even though they have their own funding, they won't see this as something as urgent compared to the internal conflict development of their country. And even if this happens, CG has provided no explanation on how this will not necessarily happen, instead of government wasting the money on local clubs with no incentive from the club themselves to reform and progress. But we will explain later why it happens on our side. My first speaker, not to give, has explained. Now to my point, OG. Judges, the urgency that the champion shows so bad does not exist in real life, because again, why would a country want to do that? To suddenly pay another country because they stole an athlete that is from a private club? Even if you somehow ban them from playing FIFA, it is not in the interest of the country, but the club. You cannot force a country to pay a huge governmental body with multiple funding and different aspects to pay for something that they are not responsible for, because again, most clubs are privately owned. These countries have other incentives to use their money wisely more than developing sports, because that is not the most important thing at the forefront of the country. We will be charitable with other teams. Other characteristic is that they will be developing their own infrastructure or resolve their own country problem. Again, because they're like the characterization, they're third world country, they're developing countries, but this also applies for developing or even developed countries, because they have their own issues and needs. Now onto CG. You cannot get rid of naturalization, however much you put barrier to it, because the goal of naturalization is inherently political, not financial. Countries who have a lot of problems, like the Gulf countries,
are inherently interested in naturalization because they want to look good. Developing countries like Indo want to appear as good as possible because of national pride. So given that sports is such a huge thing and have a lot of stakeholders from the millions of fans, the local businesses government will be incentivized to seek naturalization even if it is extremely expensive. Tying back to the MO, this will incentivize developing countries to just buy whoever best player at the country's like a club. Developing local talent isn't exclusive on your side, CG. Because like as MO said, Minister of Opposition said, the benefits of naturalization will be more highlighted for local players on a few metrics. The local players who are used to bad style of play will be exposed to more advanced style and how Asnawi is conducted with naturalized plays in Indo. Given that local leagues still have fans, and even these fans from the backbone of national team fans, there will be a market incentive for local club owners to seek better coaches and better players and build their club infrastructure because it's not their fans are going to be dissatisfied with what they see. Indonesia's for better countries to play better. This is a better incentive for us governments.
Opening.
I totally bet at coaching sports. Sports are so complicated. Europe is successful in football because of free market. The clubs owned by investors and by creating a demand for better players. Eventually, clubs in Indonesia will be incentivized to perform better. On CG side, they have not explained how they want clubs to develop. Will you just give free money to the local clubs? What the heck, balance and check and balance instead of your side? Conversely, there's no contrast on CG side because all you have is bad national team players, and fans do not have a comparison for their current national team players. There is no incentive for them to confront the local clubs, which they are fans of, to reform. The government are splurging money with no clear benefit. Like they have their own priorities, and we don't see why they would want to do this. No, in the end, CG calls a short-term gratification, but on their side, there is no gratification at all because they are mediocre. How we have tackled the government issue and advanced against our opening because we have proved to you how development is not exclusive and can still be done better in our side. We say that naturalization can still exist side by side with the development of local talent and how it would be very detrimental to the poorer countries when they have to pay because we have explained that naturalization will happen regardless and how poorer countries will have less resources to compete with the richer ones in regard. This is something, again, at the end of the day, this is why we are still above all because they miss the important idea that they bring up so many cases. They miss the important case of CG and OG is that why would they have the urgency? And this is a unique perspective coming from us. And whatever has been said by OO before cannot go above us because we provide the step to step analysis to how they would reach their arguments. For that,
Right. Thank you, Opposition Whip, for the very fine speech, and thank you everyone